Good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending this ongoing series of basic Buddhist teachings. And last week, Unyo introduced us to one of the kleshas called pride. And there's a companion to that called jealousy. So that's the one I'm going to speak on this evening. And when we say kleshas, there are many different definitions. And when I went into Wikipedia, I found a whole page of very famous or not so famous people and what they thought the word klesha meant. And it's a Sanskrit word. And one definition out of, I think it was Wikipedia, they're the mental states that cloud the mind and manifest in unwholesome actions. And of course, that word unwholesome has its own problem to it anyway. So they're often paired with those two. Pride and jealousy are paired with the other three main kleshas. And we use passion, aggression, and ignorance. And in one of these definitions, Chogyam Trungpa, from his book, The Truth of Suffering and the Path of Liberation, says kleshas are properties that dull the mind and are the basis for all unwholesome actions. So there's that word again. And I'm not planning to talk about unwholesome actions. The three main kleshas are passion, aggression, and ignorance. But what I would like to focus on is a few lines out of the sadhana of Mahamudra. And this happens just before the triple hum for those of you who have practiced that with us or on your own. Hum, hum, hum. Whatever occurs in the realm of the mind. And then in parentheses, it says, such as thoughts of the five poisons, passion, aggression, ignorance, pride, and jealousy. In parentheses, one should neither lead nor follow. Just let it remain in its true state and reach the liberation of Dharmakaya. I supplicate the Guru of self-liberated perfect insight. And so as I spend the next few minutes talking about the klesha of jealousy, I'd like you to keep in mind these 6 lines. Whatever occurs in the realm of the mind, such as thoughts of the 5 poisons, one should neither lead nor follow. Just let it remain in its true state and reach the liberation of Dharmakaya. And recently I was in a 2-week solitary retreat, or 10-day solitary retreat in Vermont at Karma Choling, and was drawn to the sadhana to practice, and particularly those lines, and I can't exactly say why, but I contemplated it for quite some time. And it certainly seems to mirror what our teacher certainly says. Don't add, don't subtract, don't divide, don't look away. Just keep looking, just observe. So in terms of the klesha of jealousy, a typical definition is, I think I own something, you think you own something, and if someone else reaches for it or wants it or indicates that they want that can trigger a reaction. It can cloud the mind. And so it brings up for me the whole idea of ownership, the whole idea of self and other. And during our book discussion today, we discussed the idea of self and other. And what does it mean? And Sokuzan used it tonight in the meditation instruction and the Q&A afterwards. What is it to be not separate? So if I am experiencing what I would call a jealous feeling, it seems to be in the realm of feelings anyway, something's being triggered, some sort of mental disturbance, something I don't like. And immediately I sink into the second noble truth. I want things to be different than they are. So jealousy causes suffering, and I don't like it, and I want things to be different than they are. Now, throughout history, there have been any number of examples, and I will cite just a couple. Buddhism does not have the corner on jealousy, not by any means. Although in the Sutra of Huineng, the platform scriptures, the story, and I was frantically looking for Red Pine's translation of it. But there is the story of Huineng, who was a nobody, and he came to study So here's the story. I'll read a little bit of it. After the death of the fifth patriarch, Hongren, the monks at the East Mountain Temple were awaiting the appointment of a new patriarch. Shen Shu was the senior monk, and he was expected to succeed Hongren. However, here comes this young and illiterate monk named Huineng arriving at the temple. And even though he wasn't well educated, he had a deep understanding of the Dharma. And Hongren, before his death, had instructed his monks to compose a verse to demonstrate their understanding of the Dharma. And that verse would then determine who the new patriarch was. And Shen Shu composed a verse which reflected his understanding. He said, "The body is the Bodhi tree. The mind is like a clear mirror. At all times, we must strive to polish it and must not let the dust collect." Now, Huineng, after hearing Shen Shu's verse, asked someone to write his verse on the wall because he was, after all, illiterate and working in the kitchen. And he wrote, or had written for him, "There is no Bodhi tree, nor stand of a mirror bright. From the beginning, not a thing is. Where can dust collect?" And so this demonstrated a deeper understanding of the Dharma. But now here's a temple full of monks. And when they heard that, or when they found out then that Hongren had given Huineng the robe and the bowl because of this deep understanding, the monks were jealous and angry because they didn't feel like he deserved it. He hadn't studied, he hadn't been there. And so here's an example from our history of jealousy. And also for any of you who have been raised in the Christian Judeo tradition, you may remember stories from the Old Testament, like Joseph in the coat of many colors, who Joseph was the favorite son. And he had other brothers who were really jealous of him because his father gave all the attention to Joseph. And so the brothers took Joseph out along a path and were going to kill him because they were so jealous. But then along came a caravan of traders on their way to Egypt, and they decided to sell Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to this caravan going to Egypt. And then they killed a goat and mopped up the blood with Joseph's coat of many colors and took it back to his father, who was devastated to learn of the supposed death. So there's an example from that particular tradition. I'm not schooled in Islam, so I'm sure there are examples in that tradition as well of jealousy. And of course, bringing forward in the New Testament, anyone who has done a little bit of study is probably well aware that the person called Jesus was attacked over and over again by the priests of the temple, the Sadducees and Pharisees. And they also were drinking from what I call the trough of hatred, just totally absorbed and full of jealousy that they couldn't see through, or couldn't bear to have this person in their midst. They couldn't think that someone else could bring the truth to them. And so those are just a couple of examples from history, and I'm sure you could probably bring up any number of others. And so here in our Buddhist tradition, the question arises, of course, is, well, what is to be done? What is an antidote to jealousy, to any of the kleshas that arise for us? And one of them is often cited as sympathetic joy, to realize that if we can, that jealousy that we feel, that hatred, that anger, that negativity that we feel really is not anything apart from who we are. And we're invited to go to the cushion, look at, as Sokuzan often says, look at the Gaza right here in our own hearts. Look at the anger, look at the hatred, the distrust, the klesha that maybe we claim is our favorite. And that's hard to do. Jealousy also often has a lot to do with self-loathing. So when we think about, and it's an extension of anger, when we think about the idea of someone having something that I want, or something's being taken away, then when we are asked to look within, it can be almost unbearable. And I'm sure any of us have known someone who is so distressed and so self-loathing that they do not think that they belong here anymore. And that's a very, very difficult situation all the way around. And so when we consider that we aren't separate, and I still don't understand all of what that means, or even any part of it, but it's like, for me, when I embody any of the negativity that arises for me, when I really look here, what I find happening is it's pride. I do not want to lose. I do not want to say yes to what's being presented. I do not want to receive. And so it's easier many times to put the wall up and say, not today. And yet, with this teaching, we're encouraged over and over again to return, 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 receive, return, come back to the cushion. And we may or may not contemplate on the cushion a particular affliction or habitual tendency or a thought pattern that seems to keep arising. But it can be a good place. And that's where it's helpful to have a teacher, a teaching, and a community. The community, I find, is really good at reflecting like a mirror. The teacher is exquisitely good at reflecting what's right in front of me, not separate. So anytime I sense or feel that negativity emitting out from what appears to be this self, it really, if I look closely, it really is this, it's full circle. It's really coming back here. And I just don't want to own it, that's all. I don't like it. It's uncomfortable. It's difficult. And so, again, back to the lines from the sadhana. Whatever occurs in the realm of the mind, and so, such as thoughts of the 5 poisons, they're easy: passion, aggression, ignorance, jealousy, and pride, or you pick your favorite one. One should neither lead nor follow. So if a thought arises and we don't chase it, we don't show it the way, or we don't follow it, and let it remain in its true state. And the way I understand that is its true state is full of pain, full of anger, full of hatred, full of distress, full of depression, full of suicidal thoughts, full of not wanting anything to be different from what I want. But if I can just let it, as Sokuzan often says, hurt, for me, that's remaining in its true state. It's pain, emotional pain. And then what happens? It seems, according to the sadhana, let it remain in its true state and reach the liberation of Dharmakaya. And it'll do it itself. Sokuzan often teaches us that if you don't do anything with anything, it can't last. One of the Buddhist teachings of impermanence, it can't last. But that's really, I find, hard to do, to not lead or follow. And another way of working with this particular klesha that showed up in the reading I did was something we do, 2 things actually, something we do every day, which is the Maitri Bhavana, loving kindness. And then also how we close the as it is sessions with the 4 immeasurables, desiring happiness for all beings everywhere. There's one of the definitions of kleshas too that showed up on this little chart that I showed you. The English term by this Daniel Goleman, Goleman, who wrote a piece called Destructive Emotions, a Scientific Dialogue with the Dalai Lama. And he refers to destructive emotions as the klesha. And he says, fundamentally, a destructive emotion which is also referred to as an obscuring or afflictive mental factor, is something that prevents the mind from ascertaining reality as it is. And this next sentence struck me. With a destructive emotion, there will always be a gap between the way things appear and the way things are. And that's what takes me back to the sadhana. One should neither lead nor follow, just let it remain in its true state and reach the liberation of Dharmakaya. So there's that gap between the way things appear and the way things are. I could use some questions.
Shoto bowing. What does it mean, like the word antidote? How you brought that up, bowing?
I think of it in terms of like medical terms, I guess. Antidote would be something that can, in a way, it could pacify, or it can, it's like a salve or a balm that would help relieve some of the pain. Yes.
Shoto bowing. Is there something inherently circular about working with antidotes and afflictions? Bowing.
I think there can be. And yet, do you find, or I find that working with circularity can also show a pattern. And in recognizing the pattern, then it's like finding that one end of the thread that can then begin to unravel. And eventually, there may not even be any need for an antidote. Not that we've gotten rid of necessarily the affliction, but it just may lose its power. Yes.
Shoto bowing. I was wondering if awareness can be a kind of antidote. Bowing.
Never. Of course. Thank you.
Shanjay bowing. So the antidote was sympathetic what?
Sympathetic joy
Sympathetic joy.
was one of the antidotes, yeah.
And how would you work with that or cultivate that?
Not very easily. And it's, let's see, I don't think I copied that one. It's appreciating that, I think, first of all, that the realization of nothing is being taken away, and to have sympathetic joy. When you think of being sympathetic to someone or with someone, it's that we have a sense of what that must feel like. And so to have that kind of outreach and just understanding that ultimately that joy is this joy, that it's ultimately not separate. But for me, it's pride that gets in the way. It's no, I don't want you to be happy. I want to be happy. Chokadawa?
Chokodo bowing. Can you have jealousy and sympathetic joy at the same time?
I think so. Shoto.
Shoto bowing. In that situation you brought up, it sounded like if we were to see that joy as not separate, we would feel it too. Why would we opt for something more painful than that? Bowing.
Because we're human beings with nerve endings, and I think it's easy to sink into the second noble truth. We have some kind of idea of what exactly we want, even though I don't know if it's been your experience, but it's certainly been mine, that I think I know what I want, but if I were to get that exactly, and I think Sugatan just said this the other day, it's not exactly, there's something not quite right. The coffee's too hot, or it doesn't have quite enough cream, and that's a very mundane example. So it also seems to me to have something to do with standards, that I have some kind of a standard that I'm embedded with, that I want it to be that way. And if it doesn't measure up, then it's not good enough.
Shoto bowing, have you experienced a situation where you were able to not differentiate the joy, and then one where you fought it? And could you say a little bit about how those show up, bowing?
I can't say if it's been a simultaneous situation, but it certainly has been a quick fluctuation where I find that things are very flat or even, and then it could be just whatever occurs in the realm of the mind, such as a thought of one of the 5 poisons, seems to be lurking very close to disturb that particular sense.
Shoto bowing, can you, or have you witnessed how, like the other things you're saying, like how that clouds something, and what that is, like what's being clouded, bowing?
I think it's wisdom, clarity.
Shoto bowing, do we have to do that to see what's being clouded, bowing?
I think that's part of the teachings. Sugran.
So Corinne Browning, how do you see letting that phrase, let it remain in its true state? What does jealousy look like when you're letting it remain in its true state?
Thank you. It's hot pain. And even that then is a thought about what it is. So just here again, we have to use words if we're going to have a discussion. It could also just be silence and just a bodily reaction.
So Corinne Bowing, do you see the path to the Dharmakaya through that teaching?
I think that the Dharmakaya is always present. It's just thoughts of the 5 poisons that cloud the path. It's like, I guess I would liken it to Buddha nature, that it's always, it underlays everything. And I guess I would call that a belief. I don't know what else. Let me just say, I haven't seen anything better in my life yet.
So Corinne Bowing, how does faith show up to you in those moments that are burning hot?
Sometimes it doesn't.
So Corinne Bowing, how does the search for that which is liberation include such darkness and despair?
Here again, if the teachings of Buddha nature, the Dharmakaya, not separate, everything that I hear through these teachings, through our teacher, through the Sangha, then I don't know what else there could be, as distasteful as it may seem at times.
Also Bowing, You talked about jealousy and I can't quite relate how you relate them, but jealousy and pride both showing up for you and being related in the same instance. Is there a difference in texture, or how would you describe if there's any difference of the true state between the two?
Yes, thank you. And I've sort of sensed that with the 9th precept, no being angry, something that I've memorized at one point or another. And read in some of my reading that it's both pride and jealousy are that the root is anger. So the 9th precept, if I can remember, no being angry, beyond our limited conceptual realm, the realm of how we think things ought to be. The boundless Dharma world is endlessly extending. Giving up our expectation of the moment and bowing to the richness of how things really are is no being angry. And so for me, that precept seems to underlie both jealousy, pride, any of the afflictions, any of the kleshas.
Those are good values. You're saying anger underlies any of all 5? Just to make sure I understand.
Yeah, that's. I've wondered in the 16 precepts that we receive or that we vow when we become ordained or receive precepts, why isn't jealousy listed, or why isn't pride listed? And so it seems to be, I think, summarized. And when I saw that in my reading today about pride and jealousy is at the root is anger. It just resonated with me. That may not be the case for everyone, but it seemed to answer why those particular kleshas weren't itemized in the 16 precepts. Anger seemed more all-inclusive.
Was it good valuing? How can it, Sokuzan has talked recently, and I think Gondo did too, about pride being particularly difficult to see. So what is the texture of pride if it's difficult to see?
I would say in my experience, the texture would be stubbornness, a closed door, a closed hand, whatever the opposite of receiving is, that would be the texture of it. It's like, no, everything else, but no, not this.
Was it good valuing? You described jealousy as a hot pain. Is pride colder?
I don't know. It's probably different for everybody. But for me, it has a lot of energy to it.
Was it good valuing? You, I had the same thought that I've been curious often why sometimes it's just the 3 poisons and why sometimes anger or jealousy and pride are included when they seem really powerful. So I guess the flip side of that question is, if anger underlies all of them, or some kind of aggression underlies jealousy and pride, what distinguishes them? Why list them separately at all?
Perhaps to get, it seems like such a universal feeling, affliction, defilement, negativity, that it's worth looking at as separated out from, to see if it has other characteristics that we can perhaps have a connection with that we can't with just one word, pride. Sure.
Show bowing. Is there a deeper pride than the emotion or the expression of pride and shame? Bowing.
I'm not sure what you're looking for.
Shadow bowing. Just considering how pride might be hard to see, but there's a very obvious aspect of pride that's pretty apparent. And I'm wondering if there's something more fundamental in pride that's not just the coming and going of the emotion that we call that bowing.
It may be tied into the self-loathing that the ego is trying to cover up. The puffiness. I'm not good enough, all of that type of negativity.
Shadow bowing. Is there some kind of pride in seeing self and other bowing?
I think so, because then blame can show up. It's not from here, it's gotta be over there. It's you. Anybody online have a question? Jasheen?
Jim Bowing. I'm wondering if you ever been able to receive jealousy, and if so, what was the outcome? Bowing.
Yeah, I have. And the outcome is pretty flat. And I'll go back to whatever occurs in the realm of the mind. One should neither lead nor follow. There are times when, for whatever reason that I have no control over, it seems, I don't lead and I don't follow. And can see it as just what it is, which seems pretty lifeless, actually. Juzan.
Does jealousy have the same quality every time it shows up?
For me personally, it has a similarity to it, but the temperature changes. Yes.
What's the similarity?
That it's a thought that I don't seem to have any control over. It just shows up.
What's important or valuable about being shown something over and over and over again?
More teachings. Gotta keep going. I could say that it seems to tie into past lives or karma, if in fact there is such a thing. It seems like there's something to that. I just don't. It's just hard to nail down.
Is there something to see, or is it important that something happens or changes?
That's a good question, because my expectation is something will change, and then not only will it change, but then it will maintain. It'll maintain that equanimity that I seem to be reaching for or searching for. And that doesn't happen either. Probably has to do with impermanence. So I think what I'm searching for is that for immeasurables that we speak. May all beings enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. May they all be free of suffering. And the root of suffering, if we're free from the root of suffering, That sounds pretty good. Yes,
In long bowing, you mentioned the second truth and the ninth precept, and there seems to be a pretty sharp contrast there between wanting something to be different and expecting it to be different, how it ought to be. So I'm wondering if your experience with jealousy enables you, or that's a too strong word, but how does your experience with jealousy help distinguish the difference between wanting something to be different and expecting something to be different? No.
I would say both are disappointing. I want something to be different, but then when it is, that's not good enough. And then if I expect something to be different, then that's even worse. And I would agree there seems to be a ninth precept, and the second noble truth is the part I have the most difficulty with in the ninth precept is bowing to things as they are. Here's your dinner. Receive it.
One more question?
Mozuku bowing, I've been trying to figure out how to ask this without an or, and I'm failing, so I'm just gonna do it anyway.
I'll fail at the answer too. So.
What distinguishes the 5 poisons from each other? Is it a texture or the trigger or the thoughts that come with it? Or something else?
I'm not sure, because they all seem to be intertwined. I think that's why we have a whole grid of different ways to describe them. Afflictive emotions, mental afflictions, destructive emotions, defilements. Can you ask your question in another way?
Mozuku bowing, if a defilement were in, or a affliction were in its true state, so you weren't attaching it to a trigger or attaching it to a bunch of thoughts about it, would you be able to distinguish them?
I've thought about that. If we didn't have the word affliction or aggression, anger, jealousy, pride, would it still be? What would it be? I think it would just be the Dharmakaya. Thank you. You can dedicate the mat.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san shi shifu shi son bu sa moko sa moko hoja. The 10 directions, the 3 times, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.